Hey, this is Ross Baden with Roleplay Public Radio. This is RPPR episode 140, Games in Your Game, because we heard you like games, dog. And with me, not as always, is Bill.
Hi, everybody.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about using mini games inside a role-playing game. So if you want to change up the flow of a game, keep your players on your feet, you can throw in a mini game. Bill suggested this idea, and I thought it would be a lot of fun. So we're going to go for it. Everyone else basically has left Springfield
temporarily. They have not fled the blighted hellscape of Southwest Missouri.
So
don't worry, Caleb and his salt will be coming back,
and Tom and Aaron and John and all them. So
they don't take as much joy in hating this place.
Before we get into it, though, we have a bit of news. We have Arc Dream, of course, is going to be at Gen Con this year, and they are needing people to help run games at Gen Con. They barely have a dozen games set up so far. I'm running one, actually. I'm running Delta Green, Observer Effect. I learned to run the scenario, so I'm going to run it. I might as well run it more than once.
I can tell. Like, for the effort you have to put into that one.
Yeah, that and Star Chamber. They're high effort, high reward scenarios.
That's also a very good con game, I can't help but feel. Because, if you screw it up, you get another chance. Spoilers.
Exactly. So I'm going to be running one game. Maybe another one. I don't know. But we need more people to run games for Arc Dream. So if you run a game, you will get free. You will be set up. They will give you swag. They will give you books or T-shirts or jackets or something. So go to I'll have a link in the show notes to go to Arc Dreams with the details on it. But if you're going to Gen Con, it's only 4 hours to run a game, and it's easy to submit. I submitted the event myself. It took me like 10 minutes on the Gen Con website. Just pick a time, add in the info, and you're done. So, give it a shot. It's you can't say you've really been to Gen Con unless you've run at least one game. So,
hey. Well, fine then.
Don't worry, Bill. There's always next year.
That's true.
So, and we also have shout outs and anecdotes. So
to come at the end.
Yeah, at the end.
As is tradition.
As is tradition. So, Bill, you're the one who came up with the idea. So, why don't we start off by you sort of giving your thoughts on why, how you came up with this idea and what your initial thinking is?
Sure. So this all sort of comes from kind of one common place to me, and like in sort of the, F20 milieu, lock picking bothers me. Because it feels like it should be some sort of, relatively intense sort of story moment, but it's the one sort of place where, like, obviously in your D&Ds and your Pathfinders and your whatever, you get, lots of loving attention to combat and stuff like that, and certain other, like, magical effects and all that. But I think, like, lockpicking was always the sort of proud nail example to me of something that should feel like a really cool moment for that player, but tends to be roll a die, pass or fail.
Yeah.
And like that sort of illustrated to me something that occasionally bugs me about RPGs in general is that like the resolution mechanics tend to not actually involve a lot of engagement from the player. Like there are shades of gray and, games that have marginal successes and all that, but like ultimately it sort of reduces to a binary. Like there's no real effort there, people with dice rituals notwithstanding. Mm-hmm. And so I've spent a lot of time kind of kicking around and exploring and looking for ways where like you can sort of drive further engagement on the player level through introducing some sort of mini game to deal with resolution, at some sort of level, whether that's at the action level, the scene level, wherever along the gaming fractal you want to deal with it. A lot of that just ends up being sort of the research that I sit around doing for funsies because I'm a nerd. And like I've tried some things out a few times. It tends to be like some of the stuff that gets the unambiguously best response from almost anybody I'm playing with. I can't think of anybody that's ever said, don't do that. I thought it'd be a thing to talk about.
Yeah, and we have examples of this in our actual play canon. I want to say, I've done it before. Mine were kind of more extensive in Heroes of New Arcadia. I actually set a session where the players were trapped in a simulated reality, and I ran the game starting out in Dread. Nice. And when they woke up or they broke free of the simulation, we went back to the Wild Talents rule set. And so that's sort of one sort of big. It's more of a mini. It's not quite a full game, but not quite just like a scene thing. Also, some of the other games, Anne, who is in the Massive Nine Lithotep campaign, she ran several one shots, and she was really good about doing this kind of thing of creating puzzles that had to be solved by the players in real life. In order to advance, and they were things like, here, I got a game on my smartphone that's a puzzle game, solve this in order to get past the lock, or and I thought that was really clever, and I like that. So there's varying degrees of what a mini game can be and how much of a role it plays in your game.
Right. The one thing, like, I wasn't present for, but I remember you telling me about, early in Duality, you handed all the hedgerow, like, spam bot stuff out.
Oh, yeah, that's another one, yeah.
Like, to varying degrees, I think you said, like, Caleb beat on that like it owed him money.
Yeah. That's actually another good point. I created, and this was actually, it was extra credit, essentially. It was like, if you want more, res for your character, basically experience points in Eclipse Phase speak. You can solve puzzles, and I actually took random spam text and put in word ciphers into it, and Caleb solved it that night because he was like, Caleb is the kind of person who will do homework the night it's assigned, and so I get, but that also illustrates another thing. Caleb was the only one who did that out of the group.
Right.
So, you're going to get varying degrees of player buy-in, I guess you could say. And you kind of have to deal with that because I think one of the big challenges of doing a mini game, is that real life player abilities are obviously not mirroring their player character abilities.
Right.
And RPGs are about that separation to a large degree. Like the shy person can become the charismatic bard, and even if in real life all he can manage is I persuade the orc to let us go, and if that's all he can manage in real life, and then rolls a natural 20, you're like, okay, yeah, you do a great job. Or the guy who wants to be the Conan-esque barbarian says, I rip the door off its hinges, even if he can't rip a door off hinges in real life.
Right.
So that's the challenge. That's sort of the corollary to that, is you kind of want to design mini games that can still be approached by the players. You know.
So a couple of points, speaking back to that. So something that may have not felt so much like a mini game, but to me, sort of worked that way, is something that'll be coming up on the Tabletop Tales feed here in a little bit, is the Hypercube episode of Armitage Files.
Yeah.
Which, while it still lived within the rules of the game by and large, structurally, it was kind of a mini game. Sort of resolving.
It was definitely a very, very elaborate puzzle. So.
It was sort of resolving things more at the scene level. So, to speak to the points you were making about being ready for player capabilities, for one, I didn't per se plan it this way, but having done the research to execute it, it was sort of 3 interlocked puzzles. It was sort of milestone 1 was figuring out that there were collections of 6 rooms that translated to cubes. Milestone 2 was figuring out which exit was which. Which, resonated between all the different cubes. And then the last one was figuring out the relationship to each other. And at each step along the way, I was prepared. As it turns out, I don't think you guys ended up using a lot of them, but I think this goes back to the point you were making about integrating with the game mechanics you're running in. I was prepared to hand you guys hints. Gumshoe's kind of a great system for this because you have that, that spin mechanic. So it's helping you walk through, or, in that case, it might not even be spins, but it could be general tests. It could just be having the ability gets you an in-game clue that tries to lead you in that leads the players in that direction, depending on how comfortable you are with, improvising and the like. But I think those are a couple of really important things to keep in mind. is that you take a fail forward approach. That like this isn't just the it's not the big key lock in a Zelda dungeon where if you can't find it, the game just skids to a halt.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you don't want it to turn into a cul-de-sac where you like basically the game sort of dead ends and you can't progress.
Right.
So you need to come up with like if the players can't solve it at all. Oh, you can. Oh, you figure out there's another copy of the key or something like that elsewhere, but there's a big monster you have to fight, and
right.
Or when you fail the puzzle, it triggers a trap that does damage, but then you can crawl out of the pit and move forward, or it opens something. Yeah, something happens. You don't just like, well,
Right. And I think, maybe one of the keys to that is looking at what game system you're running in. And like almost every game involves some sort of resource management. And like looking at what's available in that resource management, because those are probably good things to put little taxes on.
Yeah.
As failure states, but they're not necessarily dead end failures. It costs you, but you still achieve.
Yeah. That's the first thing you have to do, I think, when you're designing a minigame is one, kind of figure out how closely you want to integrate it into the game overall RPG yourself. And the ciphers I sent out were basically I would call standalone puzzles, where they were standalone mini games, where it's like, here's this thing. It's sort of either you solve it or you don't, and if you do, this will happen. If you don't, this will happen. And in the way I did that in Eclipse Phase, it was that it's a bonus. If you want additional resources, you can solve it. If you fail, well, whatever. The plot goes on.
Right.
And Anne was. I don't know what she was going to plan if we failed those, because we solved them.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think there's a word about that too, is like, I think there is, and this is, dicey territory, so go with me. But, like, I think there's a lower threshold that you can depend on. Like, not to speak ill of anyone's players, because I'm not actually, but like, I feel like you can assume a certain amount of cognitive capacity if you're playing with people who can actually manage to play a role-playing game at any level. So, like, one of the things that, I've used not quite as successfully as I wanted to, but like I've thought back on how to do it again later, is like, set up essentially something that's a combat situation where everyone save one person in the group is like trying to hold back the push while one person is working with the puzzle to solve it out. And what you do, in a case like that, is take a good solid, late elementary to early middle school maze and say, all right, but a combat round is 6 seconds. We're going to measure that real time. When your turn comes up, you have 6 seconds to progress in the maze.
Oh, wow.
And that sets a clock on how many rounds.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good, and that's sort of more of I would call like a partially integrated game where there's it ties back into the overall game mechanics. So like you solve this increment of puzzle and you get, then we tied into the combat system. Another thing, the gumshoe stuff is like, if you want additional help solving this mini game, this puzzle or whatever it is, make an investigative point spin and you'll get this additional edge. So it's partially integrated. Now the main thing is you don't want to fully integrate. Fully integrated is not really a mini game at all. That's like roll to solve puzzle. Roll to pick lock.
And I think you have to look at the game you're dealing with there. Like, as I was thinking about this ahead of time, like, I don't think I would ever do this with red markets. Nothing at all against red markets. I actually think it's kind of a strength for it. Like, there's so much resource management there already. It always feels like every choice you make is a weighty decision that like is based in your player choices and your character choices. I just don't think it would need it. At least not to a large degree.
I could see it. Because, one thing we've been talking about puzzles, we've been focusing on them, because that's sort of, I think, the easiest kind of mini game to do that is to, hey, do a Sudoku to solve this rune trap, or whatever. But those aren't the only types of games out there, obviously. So you could do anything. Of course, and even puzzles. I could see a partially integrated thing is doing the a river crossing problem in red markets. You've got, you know, a vector in a cage, a farmer, and some rations, and you have a boat that can only carry one at a time. And if the farmer's left alone with the rations, he's going to eat the rations. If the vector's left alone with the farmer, he's going to do that. So how do you get them across?
That's fair. I mean, I think that's a great example of something that's fully integrated.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
I think your entire table would stare daggers at you.
I've actually done river crossing problems in D&D, and yeah, they did stare daggers at me because they're like, "Oh, you son of a bitch." Yeah, and that's the other thing is sort of like the how integrated it is. Is this just a puzzle or is this a full mini game? Like, how are the game mechanics different and unique from that? So. Right. Yeah, we could just think of like different games and like how would we make them into a mini game, into a role playing game. So yeah, the obvious ones are puzzles, which are ways to solve traps or pick locks or something like that. Do a Sudoku to open this magic door. You know?
So I'll take sort of a sidebar right there and like sort of examine the underlying thought in what you're saying there is sort of some remarks about resonance. Like, you know, those are things that it lines up pretty well that, yeah, you know, solving tangrams or pentominoes feels very sort of trap, you know, stuff-y or runic or something like that. And like, while I would generally say you do want to try to find resonant combinations where the actual puzzle that you're presenting to your players in some way feels like that thing, you don't have to. I mean, people love Arkham Horror as a board game, but like, there's nothing that really makes that feel like cosmic horror. Like, it's all set dressing.
Yeah.
Unlike, say, Pandemic, where like that press of trying to stem the tide.
Yeah, the infection spreads almost exponentially while your efforts are linear. So there is that connection. There is that sort of disparity between mechanics and theme and that kind of thing. So
and it's not necessarily bad. It's just better when you can get it.
Yeah, no, that's true. But yeah, sometimes it can be totally divorced. Sometimes it doesn't have to be. It just depends on what you want to do, and also I think the biggest thing is as a GM is like, what do you think is going to make the players sit up and take notice? Because like the whole point of doing a mini game is to be like, I'm separating this from the rest of the game. Or in Red Markets, you know, for example, we could do the trap thing where like, oh, there's a security system that's partially disabled. Solve this puzzle in order to unlock the security vault. You know, that's the obvious one. But
the other Red Markets thing being that it already has a mini game baked in, like once per every adventure.
Yeah, the negotiations.
Negotiations. Yeah,
that's a good point. And so yeah, some role playing games have that, but they aren't necessarily all puzzle. You know, for example. And I've heard of people doing this before where, on vague anecdotal, stories from various message boards where people use video games as a mini game, be like, the typical one would be like, okay, you're trying to escape, the death, you know, the Death Knot star, before it blows up. So beat this Star Fox level, or get a better time on this race on Star Fox or whatever, and you can escape. If not, your ship is damaged and you're going to crash, and you know you have to deal with the survival adventure before you get back to the plot.
Oh man,
yeah.
So like, it would take so much effort to make sure everyone was like ready. But I could totally see doing you are limping away in your spaceship in like Ashen Stars or Gaian Reach or something. Yeah. Actually being, you must make it to round 6 in Space Team.
Okay. Yeah. There you go. Space Team. I didn't even thought of that. Or yeah, if you're doing a survival thing, yeah, you're going to be trapped on this planet for, you know, X time units, you know, survive this long in a survival video game and survive for a week in Minecraft survival or the Long Dark or something like that. And of course that then become the main thing is how do you do that? You know, everyone goes over to the living room to play that game, or not. Yeah. And so
the other thing, like, as I was thinking about that, because video games tend to be a great source in some degrees for this kind of stuff. I mean, especially the 3D, the Metroid Prime games, Zelda games, probably stuff that I'm aware of from, other. It probably revolves around like third-person exploration games. I don't remember a lot of this from Fallout, but it's probably in there. I'm just not thinking of it. But the thing you have to keep in mind is that like the failure state is so different. Like you can present a much more stark, like video games don't really have to worry about people failing forward. You can let people
That's
just
the point of the
grapple
game
with
is,
stuff. Yeah. Where like that is the caution I would use there. And like things if I'm trying to adapt, something from a video game or even use a video game, is that dynamic going to be too different? Like, is it just, are you trying to beat this one level of Star Fox? Is it one try? Are you willing to extend to multiple tries? What does that mean?
Well, that's a way to partially integrate it in the game. For example, you could get another try if you spend some resource in the RPG,
True.
Like spend a force point, if it's a Star Wars type game. Then you get another go at it,
All of that to say that's important to think about ahead of time.
Oh, yeah. You definitely need to plan this out ahead of time. You don't want to do it in the middle of the game.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I've also been trying to think while we've been talking is like how to make it more like into social conflicts or social things of the game. Instead of just puzzles or solving some sort of mechanical or, concrete kind of challenge. So I was thinking, some sort of board game that emphasizes building or civilization or something like that. That's competitive, like maybe Seven Wonders or something like that. So, let's say, you're, all explorers and you come to this alien planet, which person is the alien? And then they're like, okay, we're all going to play Seven Wonders. And they're like, why are we going to do that? All right, so this is going to help determine what the alien culture is going to be like.
Nice.
Whoever wins that. And whoever wins that is also the one the aliens think is their reincarnated god or something like that.
Well done.
So that could be one example.
Yeah.
And that's not even necessarily a winner or loser. It's just determining how it's themed. So maybe the non-social character wins the board. And don't tell them ahead of time.
Right.
So the person who's really good at board games but is playing the tank who can't talk is now the one that they're...
Quetzalcoatl.
Yeah, is suddenly Quetzalcoatl. And then like the talker is like, oh, well, tell them what to do. And like, I don't, maybe not. Look, Quetzalcoatl, why are you letting this human talk to you? We can kill him for you. He seems to be sassing you, and that can be fun. So.
Yeah. I also think, we're in a pretty good period for cooperative board games.
Yeah, that's true.
Like I could see Forbidden Desert or Forbidden Island as great exploration mini games, especially like because you sort of want to look into the back end of that. Given that those are games that you are quite likely to lose, make sure that it's not a binary.
Yeah.
Instead be like, how many treasures did you recover?
Or it could be something along the lines of like, here you find the journal of a explorer who died a century ago.
Yeah.
And his journal describes this journey, and maybe that's how he died, or maybe he retired, and something like that.
And instead, the victory thing is all like, if you actually win Forbidden Island, nobody loses Fate of Moxawil or refreshes or whatever, and if you do, you all lose one. It taxes you. Sucks to be you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think. Let's see. You could also use other. Now, one thing I did mention sort of early on was like using Dread, another role playing game as your minigame. And I do remember. I just recalled another example of that. In Eclipse Phase, very advanced sci-fi setting, they have their holodeck / they call it Simul Space in there.
Yep.
And obviously they have their own video games in Simul Space. So
take your pick.
Well, basically the way it worked out was the guy was running Eclipse Phase, and he was like, okay, you need to convince this MMO player that you're that you're worth dealing with. So we're gonna play a session of 4E D&D.
That's subtle commentary there.
Subtle commentary. I still stand by 4E D&D.
I enjoy it. It just the thing it does particularly well, and there are other things I would like to do sometimes.
No, that's fair. No edition of D&D is perfect. And then you could make that either a totally standalone thing, or you could even partially integrate in Eclipse Phase. Be like, okay, we'll step back. Well, your character dies. Well, wait, I want to hack this. I want to cheat. make a hacking test. If you fail, then your character is going to be the rest of the party will be penalized if you fail your hacking check. Because bot detected you're de-leveled or something like that. So again, don't make it like you're kicked out of the game and it fails.
Right.
Or maybe you could, and that's like it's a high stake. It's like how much this MMO player trusts you. Whenever I try and do these things, I try and make it so that it's impossible not to progress to a certain degree. So like maybe the thing that you need to progress is to find out the identity of the MMO player in question. In which case that happens like in the first scene and you don't have to make a roll for it. So the question is, if you totally fuck up everything else, you're going to have to break into that guy's apartment and, steal information from him. But if you succeed, he just gives it to you.
You know him, he knows you, and he doesn't like you, versus you know him, he knows you, and you bailed his ass out of that raid that was going south.
Yeah, exactly. So that can be fun. And so that's one way of integrating sort of different genres. So yeah, that can be fun. Oh, another thing I thought of, you're talking about co-op games.
Yeah.
Like one of the shout outs I'm going to do is The Grizzled, which is a World War One. So that not necessarily could be, there's sort of a larger category of using it to build out the campaign setting. So like you could use The Grizzled to explain, all right, these characters, this is, how these characters fared in the, you maybe play like one or two missions of The Grizzle and see what wounds they get. And like, these are the poor, sorry saps that you,
Paging Ethan Cordray?
Yeah, exactly.
Paging Ethan Cordray to the podcast.
Well, he got that idea from Glancy too. So, I think I
feel like Glancy gets enough press from it.
All right. That's fair. That's fair.
I like him.
So yeah,
he's good. Yeah. Something bouncing off of something you said later or earlier. Wow, time dilation. That's weird.
Yeah.
About like what sort of response you get from your players.
Oh yeah.
I was thinking about this. So I'm super in love with the like 8 types of fun, mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics model. Not, that it's the be all end all grand unified theory end of the world, but like
it's a useful tool.
Yes, it's a good way to talk about it. And like whenever I want to do something like this in a role playing game, I kind of like to take a step back and say, all right, so which aesthetics does this resonate with? What, if I use this mechanic, what dynamic does it produce? Driving in the direction of which aesthetics, because you can measure that against what aesthetics do I feel like my players like. Is this going to work out? So I have the list here, and I mean, if we want to take a minute and run it down,
go for it.
So number 1 is sensation, game of sense pleasure. I think it's not a guarantee, but I think like puzzles can be a great source for this.
Or video games, obviously, yeah. And we haven't even talked about like physical in real life games. Like maybe you can get through the minefield if you can get through jumping jacks, or
jacks. Please don't make me exercise.
That would be the extreme. Would be doing like an Iron Man thing, but like doing jacks or some other physical game. So yeah. Anyways.
Second is fantasy, game as make-believe. I think this actually doesn't reinforce that aesthetic. I think sort of the narrative break is probably going to take away from that, except in one particular circumstance. I think it does open up a spot for sort of emergent situations, like things that you would not expect. What we here at RPPR might commonly call the Aaron factor. Like it can produce unexpected results, sort of like a random roll table can, but I feel like players are probably going to feel a bit more ownership of it if it actually comes from their actions. But by and large, it probably doesn't, hit fantasy a whole lot.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
No, I do, because in a role playing game, normally you're focused on one narrative and you're sort of building that world in your mind, whether you're playing or running the game. But then pulling up a mini game with totally dissociative game mechanics is obviously peeling back the fourth wall at a minimum. So like, hey, do this Sudoku, and you're not thinking about Uran or Rune thing, the dwarven trap solver, his quest, you're thinking, fuck, I gotta do Sudoku now.
Right.
Or maybe, oh, great, I get to do Sudoku, hopefully.
Yeah.
But it's definitely disassociative.
Right. So that actually covers number 3 as well, which is narrative. It's divorced from narrative. It doesn't really do a lot for that.
I mean, in some ways it could, maybe the 4E D&D inside of Eclipse Phase would emphasize that.
Fair.
Because you're playing a game, you're literally playing a game. So inside that, so in that specific situation, in some specific situations, I think it would emphasize. But not
but
always.
Generally, probably not. Number 4 is challenge. I it feels a little simple to just sort of mic drop and maybe do a dab. But I think if there is one aesthetic that this really resonates on, it's going to be challenge.
Yeah.
Challenge isn't something that I feel like we see a lot of player challenge in role playing games, especially as you move more in the narrative direction.
Yeah, definitely in the narrative sense. I mean, there is a group that I think is primarily focused, like the dungeon crawlers. Yeah,
yeah.
Well, not necessarily OSR, but even especially like Pathfinder, which is not OSR. I mean, but the dungeon crawler, the dungeon crawling aesthetic.
I think there's still a lot of people in that space that are more narrative driven than we might expect.
But
the
character optimization boards, would
fair.
And certainly arena games and things like that. So, anyways,
okay, that exists. But I think by and large, it's going to hit challenge a lot. Number 5 on the list I've got here is Fellowship. This is sort of the dark horse. You wouldn't think it would, but I feel like I have seen groups cohere some of the most I've seen around these sort of things. Everybody sort of,
it's kind
scoots up in their chair. And
it's kind of a gamble, I think, because it also depends on the player group, because certain players are going to be totally tune out, and then, they don't like the gimmick. But other times, if it goes well, then everyone bonds over it and we kick this ass, you know, that kind of thing. So,
I guess that does have to do, I think, to get a little meta on this probably has to do with how much your players enjoy the aesthetics that this already reinforces.
Yeah. And again, I kind of want to talk more about player or the sort of problems of real life playability versus the puzzle or the challenge or the mini game itself.
Yeah.
So so it kind of depends on that too.
Yeah.
Anyway,
we'll put a pin in that for just a moment. So number 6 I've got here is discovery. I think that this one, by and large, you tend to feel that,
especially if you're introducing them to a game they haven't played or at all or very much.
Right. Discovery is one of my main preferred aesthetics, and I feel like puzzles, mini games. Sorry, I'm alighting to puzzles because that's sort of
it's kind of the default, and but you kind of have to, because that's the easiest one to do,
right? But I think
it's by no means the only way.
Yeah. Star Fox, 4E in my Eclipse phase, whatever, those are all going to feel pretty discovery to me. That feels mentally like uncharted territory.
Yeah. I just realized an entire category we haven't even touched on, which is using war games to simulate mass combat.
Yeah.
And that could either be totally standalone or partially integrated if you can do a skill check to do this, to give your units a +1 or whatever. So but that's a lot of work, obviously. Anyways.
Yeah. Nah, it's good. So number 7 here is expression. Game is self-discovery. These tend to be your character actor types. I don't think this does a lot for that.
I could see if the mini game itself kind of emphasizes that, kind of
fair.
Not necessarily solvable puzzles, but things that reveal stuff about your character or charades or something like that. That could be something like that.
I mean, I suppose you could say in a gumshoe kind of system, where investigative spends especially are supposed to be kind of revelatory of what the character is. It is pretty reinforcing in that way of, I solved this real world puzzle by being cool in my desired way of being cool in character.
Sure.
So that's a well taken point.
Or you could do mini game to do the whole choose the form of your destroyer thing. There's no right or wrong answer, but mental association games.
Right. So something I'm not surprised neither you or I thought of. but like Melissa with her, psych background and doing this all day probably could have thought of if we were talking about it. There's like what they call predictive tests. Like there's one called House Tree Person. There's another one that I forget, but it involves a cube and a ladder and a horse and a thunderstorm that are supposed to be sort of like modern narrative kind of Rorschach test sort of things that are somehow revelatory of
that was the kind of thing I was
individual.
thinking of.
Yeah, and that would totally work. Could also, that definitely gets you in your Burrows kind of direction if you want to run a kind of fucked up kind of game. So,
unknown armies,
Yeah, share and enjoy. So finally on the list, and then we can dispose of this, is submission or abnegation or whatever. Obviously, since this takes sort of doubling down on engagement and coming up to the table and like ideally everyone sort of cohering and working together, I don't think it's going to do a lot for that. I mean, I pick on Tom a lot, but he's sort of the example of like, I figure if I do this at a table that Tom's at, he's not going to buy in. That's fine. Like he'll just take a few minutes and look at cat pictures or something. But like, and Tom's a great guy and a pretty giving player in that respect. And he's not going to like bitch and moan about it or hold it against me, but I'm just not going to have him in that moment.
Yeah. I mean, there are players that like, they're interested in the scenes that they're in and then they kind of tune out, you know? And
sometimes I do that.
Yeah. Everyone does that to some degree. But yeah, there are going to be, for mini games, they're by default more active than they're more demanding than the typical game, just because of the change, if nothing else. And I thought of another category too, which is actually one you kind of were talking about last night, which is using a mini game to define your setting. Like, The Quiet Year or Microscope. Or something like that. You could do any number of strategy games, like in Seven Wonders or something like that. To like, what's that one about the ages of different like?
That is Seven Wonders.
That is Seven Wonders.
Yeah. That has the 3 ages of the ancient civilizations.
Not the real life civilizations. The one with like orcs and trolls.
Oh, Small World.
Small World. Yeah. So if you wanted to generate the history of your fantasy kingdom, you could be like, and then the trolls, and then the skeletons, and then these guys showed up, and then so there are a lot of ways of doing that. But that could, but The Quiet Year and Microscope are obviously going to be
they're almost purpose built.
They're almost purpose built to generate settings for your post-apocalyptic or whatever setting.
Yeah, so I mean they're fun in their own right. They're worthwhile games to play in their own right. But man, do they do that?
So that's another mini game. It's not even inside your RPG. It's like a prequel to your game.
I'm pretty sure. What was it? I think Ken Hite, like not his recently concluded Unknown Armies Rex of the Old 97, but like the one before that was doing a spacefaring game where they used Microscope as the like setting generation ahead of time. Yeah.
Now that I think about it, I think one of the larger things you can be doing is thinking of your campaign as a story and then using different games to tell that story. Like each game, like there's a primary game for it, and then but for different elements of it, like, oh, well, at this point, the rebellion has to fight the evil empire, so we're going to pull out this fantasy war game, and I've kind of converted these guys into these units, and we'll do this. And certainly, though, the more ambitious you are, you're going to run into problems or challenges. One thing, player buy-in, as we talked about, but also the other thing is you're essentially playtesting a new game. And that doesn't mean it's going to work the way you want it to right out of the gate.
Right. I think, apart from, and I've certainly hit on the make sure you're prepared to fail forward version of this a lot of times, the other like major thing I would say is this will up your prep involvement. Like this takes effort. You cannot improvise this. Maybe you can. Maybe you are tremendously more talented than me.
Well, if it's simple, like, let's go play a round of Needhog to simulate how the fencing tournament's going to go,
Fair.
That is something simple like that. Or let's go, play beer pong to see how well you impress the people at the tavern, in which case.
Caleb wins. Flawless victory.
Caleb and Spencer win, so that's what those are simple, but they're still taxing things.
Let's see. Oh, yeah. I was about to say, for more on a specific example of the using two games together to cover different parts of your game, please see previous episode.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of pitfalls to this, but like I think it really pays off in the end. And like, let's see, what other games haven't we done? We've talked a little bit about using board games. Obviously, puzzles are kind of the main thing. But can you think of any other kind of games that we haven't sort of touched on at all? I mean, we could talk more about doing like physical or board games or video games.
So something,
or maybe like what kind of things are used for in games. Yeah.
Okay. So what I've got handy, like just because I talked earlier about like how you want to chum the water with a lot of stuff on this to sort of let ideas float to the top and sort of hit that resonance.
Yeah.
I'm just going to throw out like the lists I brought. These are sort of, my go-tos to look for things and like we can dig into those. So the first place you probably ought to go is Wikipedia and go to the lists of logic puzzles page. Because that's going to get you like all of your Sudoku style number puzzles. It's going to talk about different types of word puzzles. And it'll also get you into some things like I think something we haven't hit on that doesn't feel quite like a conventional puzzle. At some point, I do want to dig in and run an investigation game that is like using the integrated game mechanics to actually work off one of those like gridded logic puzzles where like, you know, the four families live in four houses in a row that are different colors and each one has a different pet and different
like the lady
favorite
the tiger
flavor of ice cream.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that one's fairly binary.
Yeah.
But it's like, you know.
Well, there's variations to that, yeah.
Yeah. So essentially you have, you know, 3 or 4 clues with 3 or 4 iterations each, and you're trying to narrow down which specific combination. I mean, it probably is as easy, you know, you could do it in means, motive, and opportunity.
Yeah. Or you could, you know, another way of doing it if you want to be really simple, because, you know, again, varying groups are going to have varying levels of interest in those kind of puzzles. You could do Clue. You could literally play Clue. And if you can we're going to play Clue. If you can solve it in, let's say, 10 minutes, then you get this bonus. If it takes you this long, this will have the quicker you solve it, the easier, the less time the killer has to get away, you know? So like so the chase scene will be easier, to get after the killer. So, so that's an extreme example. But yeah, like just on the logic puzzles page, there's like 100 entries, so I haven't dug through them all. Like a lot of them are going to be number stuff, but like there's a lot of good things to go to there. From there, blow it back up to the puzzles in general page. Just realize you're going to get into some thought experiments there as well, which isn't necessarily bad. I mean, Ross loves a good trolley problem. Yeah, I do like trolley problems. Moral dilemma kind of things. You know, I thought of another example. In Planescape, the setting, they have, I can't remember the guys. They're kind of servants of Sigil, the central city that's the hub of the setting. And they only speak in rebuses. You know, they only speak in little symbols that appear over their head. That, you know, like they use they show a picture of an eye to represent the word eye.
Yeah.
And what's that board game of where you put little concept? Yeah. Use concept to talk to a rebus, or talk to one of those guys. That
or I mean, I think okay. So something like if you float around there in the sort of talking about RPGs part of the internet anyway, you hear a lot of gumph about like why would you ever have languages be a skill in a game? It tends to not do a whole lot. But I think that'd be a great way to implement, you know, actual language difficulties. I mean, that's a hell of a way to do Darmok. As an RPG.
You could have the advantages, you know, if they spend points or whatever, they can get clues or, you know, partially solve the phrase. And not even use like the cards in concept, just be like, you talk to the guy and the GM then has to figure, all right, he's going to say this. So he starts putting the tiles down, and he's like, all right, 4 words, and then you use concept to use the concept board just to communicate with this one guy.
Yeah.
And so the players and then it's optional, but the players can get a massive advantage if they can, get in. He knows everything, or he has some sort of power that can really help them. If they want to suffer through it, like how complex do you want to get? Like, can you tell me what, if they ask him a really complex question, he has to give them a really complex answer. So,
Right.
So it's scalable too.
Yeah. It's also got a lot of layers and some potential for massive bastardry because like that all assumes that someone's actually wanting to communicate what they want to communicate.
Yeah.
Like if it turns into a situation where you're essentially trying to red herring the players onto a completely wrong conclusion.
Oh yeah. Yeah, how do you tell if that guy's lying? How do you tell if he's doing this? Oh my God, yeah. So that and that's also a social thing too, because then the entire group is involved, and you're actually talking to an NPC, So that actually, and you could do 100 variations of that, of like some sort of barrier to communication between that. So that could be really fun.
Yeah.
So.
Wow, I think a whole lot of bluffing games are going to be like.
Oh yeah.
All right. I feel like you or I will be honor bound to do this now. Some way to work Meow by Asmati Games into a role playing session.
You had a copy out last night, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was thinking, obviously the easiest would be Call of Cthulhu somehow. So, who's secretly Amigo alien? Whoever fails Meow.
But like even beyond that. It might strain like game time too much to really want to play out like full versions of Werewolf. But one of my nephews actually got One Night Werewolf, One Night Ultimate Werewolf this past Christmas, and like I helped him learn how to play that. I hadn't played it before. It's a lot of fun. I want to pick it up now.
Yeah,
it's maybe got a bit of a learning curve, but like I could see that. Because it plays out probably in like 10 minutes, plays out an entire game.
The main challenge with that, I think, it seems most werewolf games do better with like, a dozen people as opposed to like 3 to 6, which is what an RPG.
So what I'll say about that, specifically why I said One Night Werewolf or like Resistance could work for this as well, is that they are designed for smaller groups. Like in One Night Ultimate Werewolf, you have I think at most 2 people that are vanilla villagers. Everyone else has special roles. There are people like the Tanner is a villager who hates his life and wants to die. So the point, like he's trying to bluff everyone else into thinking he's a werewolf so he gets killed.
Okay.
And if he does, he wins and everyone else loses.
Nice. I like that. I like that. So I think, what was I going to say? You could use Resistance or something like that to do a mole hunt, in an espionage, Night's Black Agents or Delta Green type game. And then if the players win, they find the mole and they stop it. If they fail, then there's an attack, or their efforts get sabotaged. It's not a fail state.
Right.
It's just you have to complete a secondary objective that's more difficult.
Or even, and that can split tripartite in that particular version. There's find the mole, there's sort of the bad state of the attack happens, and then there's the third way of like you don't find the mole, but you find his trail enough that you know where the attack is going to happen.
Yeah. And one thing is also I see these mini games would be a really good way of depicting off-screen action.
Yeah.
Like things that you have the PC team, the player characters, they're over here doing this thing. But if you're doing like Delta Green, and the players, there's a infiltrated agent, so you could run a game of Resistance to see how much damage the mole does.
Right.
And this is all the NPCs fighting the NPCs kind of thing. So that kind of resolves that quickly.
Yeah.
And you don't have to stat out things. You don't have to do a whole scenario. It's
And to like really bake the feedback loop in full circle. If you wanted to go really deep on that, like the player's starting position in playing Resistance could be determined by how their last op went in character.
Yeah.
So, like, if it goes off well, they get advantages and it's easier to play.
Yeah, because there's different modes for it, too.
Yes.
Like, there's an easy and there's a standard and there's a hard difficulty.
Right.
Yeah.
And then that feedbacks out to, whether the mole is caught or not determines how hard the PC's next mission is.
Yeah, or like for a superhero game, the bad guys released a toxin, play Pandemic to see how bad the infection goes. And then if the players totally fail, then the mission becomes, well, we got to go back in time and fix this fucking thing, and then so it becomes a very difficult time travel scenario.
Or you just pivot the campaign.
Yeah, or you pivot the campaign. Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, it depends on how. How much you want the players, how this game affects the entire campaign, and again, this all goes down to dealing with players and finding out what the consensus of your table is. I'd recommend starting small with some of these things, like make them small optional things, and either in between games or separate to the game, or something that one person can be doing it while you're doing the scene with someone else. You know?
That's why I kind of like the maze during a combat. Thing.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good way of sort of breaking them in there.
Yeah.
Just get a stopwatch or something, or a stopwatch feature on your smartphone.
So just a few more things I'll throw out there, just sort of options to use with this. So I keep a bunch of these on an Amazon wish list, and I feel like spending $20 on something that's not super important. But like Tangrams are great. I actually like Pentominoes a little better. They're the ones that look a bit more like Tetris blocks.
Okay.
There are also, you probably all remember them from about second or third grade, those colored pattern blocks that are basically all the regular shapes that tessellate, and they're all different colors. You can get pattern cards, so essentially you have to build it out like that. And then the other thing I tend to have on here, there's a company called Think Fun, that if you've been in like toy stores or certain like kids focused game stores, do a lot of things. Like they did the Robot Turtles game, that you may remember, like is sort of ostensibly about coding, but like their big thing the last few years was the physical version of the game Rush Hour. So if you look up their stuff on Amazon, there's a lot of different options there, things that these would necessarily be somewhat more disconnected mechanics, but I think they're great in terms of like the puzzle solving part of this. Those might be the slightly harder things to find, novel things. Like I think most of us are fairly well aware of video games.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, there's a ton of video games out there, but there's a ton of smartphone apps, smartphone games, mobile games, that you could figure out how to adjudicate certain events in games, especially if you're running like an Eclipse Phase style game where there's crazy sci-fi tech and integrated and everything.
That'd probably be cool with that. Like for sort of before now genres, I'm sort of inclined to be a grumpy old man and to like actually do physical things.
Yeah, that's true. I think the game should be appropriate to the genre of the mini game should be appropriate to the genre of the actual game of the RPG.
If you've got a good idea, go with that, but pick up all the resonance you can when you can.
Yeah, and they can also actually thematically help the setting too. I feel like if you want to be a bastard in sort of an Eclipse Phase thing, you could be like, okay, you go into this habitat that's run by a crazy, sort of everything's been gamified in an Orwellian way. So like, if you want to do anything, you have to play a shitty free-to-play game on your phone, for the daily limit and show me your progress. So load up these games, or here, I'll hand you an old smartphone that I have. So it runs them slow. So show me you've done this thing.
Yes, my minions, play Candy Crush for my enjoyment.
Yeah, exactly. Play Candy Crush to represent you working 8 hours at the life support center, or whatever.
This is like the bicycle episode of Black Mirror.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that tedium to represent that. So that's you doing your cover, while you're really doing Eclipse Phasey thing. So like every time you complete a mission in Candy Crush Phase, you get one time unit to do a thing in your Eclipse Phase job. So and then the players are like resenting the whole habitat itself, because like again, everything's been gamified and totalitarian and all that other fun stuff. So or maybe that represents them essentially Bitcoin mining while they're doing their real secret agent stuff. So
nice.
There's a lot of ways you can do that. So anyways,
I'll throw one more thing
Sure.
in, just because we brought up the 8 Types of Fun and the MDA model again. If you're a nerd and want to go read about that, one of the guys who's presented, done a lot of the research and presented a lot at GDC, has that stuff out on a website. It's Algorithmancy, algorithm plus Mancy, .8kindsoffun.com. Has a nice little summary, some overview, and then 2 or 3 PowerPoints with notes and even the MDA academic paper.
Okay.
I'll
get links up. Yeah.
And it's good reading if you're into overthinking things, which sign me up.
If you're running games if you're running a role playing game, you're probably overthinking things anyway. So
why not overthink with the best minds in the industry?
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Are there any good survival games? If you're trying to do a game where you're trying to Oregon Trail across a fantasy realm or even a post-apocalyptic realm, would there be sci-fi colonize a planet thing? Are there any games about overland journeys that you can think of?
Maybe not in that sense, but one of my other sort of pocket interests that I want to boil up to a thing someday, what you want to do for that probably is do a deep dive on OSR blogs, because man, are there resources out there for hex crawls.
Yeah, that's true.
What you're talking about.
And that's putting an RPG inside an RPG, essentially. Yeah. So, yeah.
I know I've probably shouted out to Justin Alexander at thealexandrian.net before, but he's got a great series on hex crawls that if you're looking to do that sort of thing is worth your time and probably could be adapted to. Yeah. I mean, granted, you said planetary colonization, so I'm saying if you're really a masochist, you could do that with Twilight Imperium. I don't know why you would.
Well, I'm talking about you have to get from point A to point B, but that's 1,000 miles, so you have to go and get food and stuff like that.
That's definitely your hex crawl.
Yeah. I feel like there's board. I think I want to say that there are board games like that or some kind of strategy game like that.
Yeah.
But I can't think of them off the top of my head. Yeah, so
it's left as an exercise to the listener.
If you, I'm sure in the comments, please let us know what other kind of games you've done, what kind of mini games would work. I'm sure we thought, I'm sure we've missed something. I feel like the war game stuff we barely touched on, but there's a ton of war games out there. There's a ton of free rules, not just the big ones like the skirmish games with mini games, but there's a lot of games like a drive-through RPG where you can just get the rules and stat out whatever kind of figures you want as units.
And buy a big brick of D6s.
Yeah, essentially. Not
even for rolling, just for these are my dudes.
Yeah, these are your dudes. I got one a little while ago called Toy Wars, where you can stat out everything from Barbie dolls to little plastic GIs and have a fight.
We toads have to do that this summer.
We're probably. I have this idea, sort of an aside, of doing Iron Man Toy War, where we get a bunch of toys from the Goodwill, and then go out to Aaron's family has a farm outside of city.
As does mine.
And we just get fireworks, and then the unit that dies goes to Valhalla via fireworks. And to record this via, we will videotape it as well for fun. So there's something like that. That could be a good way of having your big epic finale, because most RPGs you don't want to have a army of thousands fight an army of thousands,
right?
And we have talked about it in the last episode, but that's kind of a whole separate thing. So, anyways,
I'll invite you to not think about Toy Story 3 while doing that.
Exactly. So, all the feels,
all of them.
So, when we come back, we'll have shout outs and anecdotes.
Woo!
And we're back with whatever kind of synthwave or vaporwave, whatever music I put in there.
It's going to be electronica.
It will probably be electronica. I have been using more music, a variety of music for the Mix 6, but, I'm just producer Ross on that. So, anyways, Bill, you actually thought of something in our break for our main topic before we get into shout-outs. So,
rewinding back to the very beginning, I brought up the whole thing about sort of lockpicking being the thing that really was kind of the proud nail that made me think about this. On the Hack and Slash blog, I'll give Ross a link to post. I actually found something in the end that I really like for that. It's a version of lockpicking as playing Yahtzee. The character's skill at lockpicking determines the number of dice they get to roll, and the difficulty of the lock determines the quality of Yahtzee hand they have to build out of it to unlock the lock.
Yeah, all you have to do is figure out like what are the penalties for not being able to make your hand. And, is the lock broken now, or can you try again? How many times can you get? If it's a time thing, are you making noise that is going to alert nearby monsters or whatever, or guards? But yeah, that's a great idea. So, and that's for any game where you can't pick locks, not in just fantasy, but like modern day. So, I like it.
All right.
So let's get into shout outs.
All right.
So first shout out I have is a manga series I have been reading, called I Am a Hero. And this is a zombie apocalypse thing. But this is sort of like the antithesis of, High School of the Dead, because this is not just fan service and ridiculous action and makes you feel creepy for just reading it. No, this is like a very character focused, thing. Story. It is about a zombie apocalypse, but the first I'm reading the Dark Horse Omnibus. I read the first 2 volumes, and I think volume 3 is going to be out later this month. It follows this guy Hideo, which is very close to hero in Japanese, so that's why he calls himself I am a hero. I'm Hideo. So
what you did there.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing in the manga series. So he suffers from some sort of mental illness. It's not specified so far. It could be schizophrenia or something like that, where he suffers from hallucinations. But he knows he suffers from hallucinations, and so even though he sees them, he has coping strategies, and so he's able to lead a normal life, more or less. And he's a manga artist, and he's working away in a studio doing backgrounds and that kind of thing. Very grueling hours, but. And he has a girlfriend, and he also has a gun license. He actually has a breech-loading shotgun that he keeps locked up most of the time, and he just uses it for target shooting. He doesn't even have a hunting license yet. So the first volume is more or less about this guy's life and his struggles with his mental illness and his work struggles. Trying to be an artist, trying to get his own series. And dealing with his coworkers, who are all they're all neurotic and, kind of messed up people. Well, not like super messed up, but like in a realistic way, And in the background, there are news reports. You can go, there's a fire at this nursing home, and this person was bitten by someone, and the police, and it's getting worse and worse, and they're totally oblivious to it. All the main characters just tune it out, and they're all focused on life. And the poor guy, he sees someone hit a zombie with their car. The zombie walks in the middle of the road. He's like, and the zombie walks off with her neck broken, like her head is looking at the back. Like it's totally like it's like a Pez dispenser. And he's like,
clearly I must be hallucinating.
Yeah, exactly. And so they have all these justifications, and then of course the outbreak happens, and the guy is just losing his shit, and it kind of goes, I wouldn't say like this, there's this bit where he gets into this sea of trees, the suicide forest.
Yeah.
And he's at night, and he's at his lowest point. Everyone he knows is dead, and he's just and the hallucination comes out, and it's just you kind of feel this guy's absolute. Like he is at the lowest point anyone could be and still be alive. The utter, and it's the dark night of the soul in a zombie apocalypse, and it's kind of moving, and it's so I'm really looking forward to seeing the rest of it, and it's actually it is, I think, the greatest, definitely. Miles above High School of the Dead, and it's not about making the hero awesome and cool. And they have this commentary about manga too. Like the guy is trying to make this manga series without like a cool or charismatic hero. It's kind of like a sort of a wallflower nobody characters. People, you need someone who's really bad. You can't have these nobodies as main characters. And he's kind of like, it's like, oh God, the more I think about it, the more I like it. Layers upon layers. Yeah. So. That's my first shout out.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. My first shout out is to you. And in saying that, I'm not talking. I mean, you're awesome, Ross. This is a great podcast. I'm glad to be a part of it. But that's not what I mean. And listeners know this is not some sort of NPR or PBS comment. I'm not talking about listeners like you. I'm talking about Greg Stolze's new novel, You, which is an Unknown Armies novel. Just kickstarted. I just got my Dead Tree copy yesterday, so I haven't dug into it too deep, but I read the 20 pages of preview.
Yeah, it should be available for you can buy it now.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, it's out there. I think
if you did
for EPUB and POB or POD. If like me, you prefer that more trees are consumed to make paper instead of using old trees in the form of coal to read your books.
Yeah.
Commentary.
Some of it's wind. Our local power plant is getting a fourth of its power from a wind farm in Oklahoma.
Oh, well, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, I like books as a physical artifact, so there's that. But yeah, novelly, see what I did there?
Yeah.
It is written in the second person, which I think is pretty great for the themes that Unknown Armies is trying to do, considering the tagline of the game is "You did it."
Yeah.
And it is a very humanist horror game. I really enjoyed the first 20 or so pages, and once I've cleared a couple of open loops off my reading list, I'm going to dig into it.
I'm not giving a shout out yet, but after I finish I'm Here, I started Universal Harvester.
I heard about that.
I'm about a third of the way through it. It's really good so far, but I'll give the full review in the future episode.
I'm behind before. I know they're not connected, but I figure I probably ought to go give Wolf and White Van a go before.
I think Caleb's mentioned it before in the podcast, but I want to read that next because I'm really digging Universal Harvester.
I've got 3 Body Problem checked out from the library, and I need to.
Caleb's reading the sequel to that right now. He's audio booking it right now. So we'll have to get his full review in a future episode. So.
Indeed.
Anyways, next actual shout out is something that was mentioned on the Mix 6, but I hadn't watched it yet, so I went ahead and watched it. And this is Young Justice, which is on Netflix. The only 2 seasons. They're doing a 3rd season sometime later this year or next year. They're working on it, but it's an amazingly well written. It's probably the best. It's up there with Batman the Animated Series. I can't tell which is better, but they're both phenomenal. This is really well written, and the thing is, it's for an ensemble cast, and they make use of the entire DC continuity, and they do it well. And they do it's Knights Black Agents levels of deception and espionage in there, because they're going undercover, and there's some of the heroes go undercover. There's all this kind of it's all secrets and lies, And what's amazing, there's again 8 or so main heroes in it, and they all have story arcs. They have for all of them. So it's 2 seasons. It's not super long to watch. So you haven't watched it yet. I mean, it's just good writing and interesting characters and interesting dilemmas. Shit gets real, and then it gets more real, and you're like, oh my God. But it doesn't get too dark because it's a cartoon, but it's really intense for a cartoon. So it's worth watching.
I'll have to put that on my queue.
Yeah.
So I've got another one. I'm going to switch up the printed order here, do things a little different. But those of you who are Patreon backers and listen to After Hours probably heard the bit where I made an arbitrary choice and received a code from Ross for the game Nuclear Throne, which is available on PlayStation Network, probably some other things.
PC, definitely.
Not. Okay. It's sort of in my wheelhouse. It is a top-down twin-stick shooter with a retro aesthetic. It is a bit faster playing than The Binding of Isaac. Tends to be a bit more actiony, bit less strategic.
Kind of bullet helly at times.
Yes, quite bullet helly. It occupies a nice place between Binding of Isaac and Enter the Gungeon. I have made depressingly little progress in Enter the Gungeon.
I've heard that's just ridiculously hard.
It is hard as fuck.
Yeah.
But Nuclear Throne is a nice game in those models. You get to shoot bullet at bad guy and move away from bad guy bullet.
Who's your favorite class or character type?
It's toss up. I do like fish because I like the combat roll, and the extra ammo is nice. I'm also into plant because faster is nice. Those tend to be my my jams.
I could not do well at all outside of Crystal because of his bouncy, bouncing bullets away. Like that saves my ass. I cannot do. I've tried. Well, I haven't tried too hard, but like I do well with Crystal, so I'm just like,
all right,
Crystal. But it's for me, it's such an intense experience. There's no abnegation in that for me. I'm just like, my heart is pounding, and there's like, oh God, I almost got it.
See, I really get into this like sort of nice nonverbal flow state about it, which is nicely abnegatory for me. So
for me, I think it's because I'm like, I'm going to beat it this time. I think my expectations are too high.
Yeah, no, I assume when I boot it up, I have already lost. I am just playing to see, like, I am choosing the form of the destructor.
All right. It's a good game, is what we're saying.
Yes.
Next up, I would like to mention Fragged Empire, which is a role-playing game I've got. It was kickstarted last year or the year before. It's a post-apocalyptic sci-fi role-playing game.
Oh, nice.
It's like, the apocalypse happened and humans are gone, but there's different alien races, and it's a space opera type. There's, planets everywhere, people everywhere. And you kind of go around, and it's beautiful. It's got beautiful art and beautiful graphic design. It's very clean. And they have two versions of the rules. Like one is the how far can your ship rotate in around, kind of like level of space combat. And then they have the story version where it's like make skill checks to do thing. So you can choose whether you're going to have tactical grid based combat or not. And both are supported by the rules, which is nice.
Cool.
But the other thing I like is they have these rules for like finding secrets of the past, researching them, and then like using them for your characters to improve your characters, or like, and this is not necessarily science or technology. You could do with like literally like kung fu secrets. Like your character finds the secret manual for hand-to-hand combat and becomes the one guy with the one true punch or whatever, or the 5 Buddhist palm technique or whatever it was in Kung Fu Hustle.
Nice.
So that's a game that I'd like to play at some point. But we've got a lot of games to play. So
indeed.
Let's see here. Oh yeah.
So shout out to another podcast. I tend to do my podcast in binges because like my work is not super interactive. If I'm not in a meeting or having the occasional chat with someone, I am like up to my armpits in spreadsheet. And it's, as I've said before, really good to sort of engage the verbal part of my brain so I don't get, distracted, and I can concentrate on maths and datas. But what I've been binging lately is GM Word of the Week, which is written by the Angry GM, who we've talked about before.
I played a game with him. I played Hack and Slash with him at Gen Con. That was run by Kieran Robinson, the author of Hack and Slash, like in 2013. So,
all right.
Anyways,
generally, I mean, there are lots of feels out there on the interwebs about the Angry GM. I feel like his approach is mainly a scrim. It's sort of a gimmick. Like,
sure,
he makes it pretty obvious he does not feel as strongly as he wants you to think he feels about things. So, I don't know. I come not to Caesar Augustus reference, etc. That notwithstanding, he writes the scripts, does the research for it. It's about a 20-minute a week podcast that sort of apes the format of a word of the day calendar, and appeals to me a lot because it has vast digressions. Last week's episode was Otyug, which had about a 10-minute recap of who exactly was Jesus Christ from a historical perspective, and what are the basics of Christian theology. And why was that important? Because Ed Greenwood once said that the actual name of Otyugs bore Golgotha as the word root, and the Angry GM and Fiddleback, the guy who does the reading, related that to the Golgothan demon from Dogma.
Oh, shitty.
Also, like, a Golgothan should not necessarily be a crap monster. Other than it had to do with the sort of, death evacuations of all the guys that were crucified there, etc. Go watch Dogma. Okay. It's a movie. But, like, it's that sort of thing in about 20 minutes. They're great for just sort of plowing through.
We got Otyug for sale. Back in there. Cool. I like that.
There's some really good series runs of them. Like there was one on various landforms where he was talking about like taigas and tundras and cloud forests and all that crap. There was a run, I think, on various, eccentric weapons where he talked about, how pole arms really don't work like we think pole arms work from a nomenclature standpoint. There's one on weird stuff in adventuring chapters, like why all of a sudden in 5th ed did the alchemy jug start making mayonnaise? It's great. It's 20 minutes of Wikipedia effect.
Nice. Cool. Yeah, that does sound pretty good. I only tend to listen to podcasts when I'm on road trips, because when I write, I can't listen to people talk. That's verbal. So that doesn't hurt my brain meats.
So what, you listen to Rush, like math rock? Is that how you get I'm assuming it must be the inverse of my process. I listen to
synthwave and vaporwave. Also, drum and bass and trip hop. So, instrumental music is what I'm saying. So my final shout out is the Grizzled, which is a card game we did mention earlier. A hard as balls card game that we only won because we basically cheated and played on the easiest setting. It is.
I feel like that was cheating. It was a choice.
Yeah. Well, no, because telling Tom like, no, if you do that, we lose the mission, multiple times, and letting him take back moves.
Co-op games that insist on withholding information from other players just don't make sense to me.
All right, that's fair. So Grizzled is you're a group of soldiers in World War One, and you're trying to survive the war. And the way the game works is that you have a deck of cards that you have to basically all play through. You have to successfully complete. Every time you complete a mission, every card that's been played in that mission is then discarded. And the more cards you play, the more difficult your mission becomes. And because each card will have a threat on it. If you get 3 of the same type of threat, your mission fails. So that could be knight or artillery or rain or something like that. So if there's 3, and the cards will have multiple threats on them usually, or injuries that your characters have that induce some sort of penalty that carries over. So it becomes a game of balance of like how many cards you want per mission, and that kind of thing. And it's been really fun. It was fun and it's well done, but Caleb and Spencer have talked to me about it, and they said it's basically unwinnable if you have 5 players. And I can see,
it scales to the number of players.
Yeah, it scales to the number of players, and just having that many, it's fun though, and it's cheap, so it's worth trying to get, or it's worth getting playing. So I don't know how strong of an endorsement that was. Yeah, you'll probably lose all your games, but it's fun. Yeah,
I mean, there's a reason Forbidden Island and Forbidden Desert sell well.
Yeah, all right, that's fair. So finally, anecdote. We've been playing a lot of different games. Just to give you some idea, I have run a one shot of Red Market and Spirit of 77 recently,
which was great.
And then but I've mostly been running Base Raiders.
Yes,
because we're continuing on with Gate 9.
Gate 9.
This on the second tier where the players are all grown up and they're dealing with world problems, and
we're failing at adulting.
No, you're saving the world-ish. I mean, the world hasn't blown up yet, so
yet.
Like
of the normal Tuesday group, Sean and I are both role-playing characters who are not good at making decisions. When Caleb's around, he is also
Caleb. Yeah, he's
trying to be good in a dramatic way that involves making decisions that only seem to be good on the outside.
Yeah, very well. So, what's been in some of our recent games? What's been one of your more favorite moments? Or
I really liked. So this takes a little backing into because the things you do in Base Raiders sort of acquire a certain inertia at a certain point. It's like you step back and say, how did we get here? And then you break out the corkboard. I recently, to achieve my character's goals, I realized I needed a large sum of money. Rubbing up against something we had done earlier, we had sort of become tangentially involved with Bio Buddies, which are a completely original game property involving small creatures that are raised by children and battle other small creatures raised by children. Original concept, do not sue Game Freak.
I could not have said it better myself.
So because we had a certain degree of leverage to begin with on that, I decided the best way to make money and also deal with the fact that we had a bit of a problem with potentially BioBuddies going feral and becoming an invasive species was to try to pump and dump the market because this is obviously a consumer product and so depends on popularity. So if we made it popular enough, nobody would want it anymore because it would stop being cool. To do that, we had to corner the already present North American market. One element of that involved wiping out the other major BioBuddy
or taking
gym.
them over.
Yeah, or taking over the other major BioBuddy gym on the North American continent, which was the Rocky Mountain gym up in probably Alberta.
Yeah.
So we got in there, did our base rating thing after a fashion. It involved rather more interacting with people than normal, but that's fine. We're decent at that as a group. And then we found out that the Rocky Mountain Gym was exposing their war tortoises to the elemental plane of Earth to make them stronger. And we were like, you should...
I think they're gush tortoises.
Gush tortoises.
Yeah,
yes,
I think.
war tortoises. Yeah,
Yeah.
close to actually being the thing. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Gush tortoise. Ugh, I'm so wrong.
Yeah.
So we went through the portal to the elemental plane of Earth to try to deal with, stopping them doing that and maybe take over the gym, where we met the leader of the gym, which was a Gestalt entity made up of dozens, if not hundreds, of smaller Earth elementals that were joined together. And it was related to us ultimately that the best way probably to get rid of him and take over the gym would be to foment a rebellion amongst his many parts.
Yeah.
So that sort of led up to the moment that I feel like is sort of the base Raiders-iest bit of this anecdote, where my character, Jeff, adult contemporary, flew up and tried to convert the head to Randianism to make him realize that the rest of the body were takers that were taking from him. / them. I guess the head was kind of working together.
Yeah.
Caleb, as American Pharaoh, incited the arms into rebellion against each other via paranoia and literally the right hand not knowing what the left is doing. Let's see. He was talking to one of the arms. Sean, as Ivan, was using his Ouroboros agents to distract the other arm so it wouldn't see the sucker punch coming. And finally, Tom as Kurzik or whoever. I think.
Yeah,
that's
Tom
his name.
joined the campaign in the second half.
Yeah.
And he basically made a battle toad.
Yeah. I always think I'm getting the name wrong because...
No, it's Kurzik. Yeah.
Okay. We had discovered a drone that a grandmother of the second in command at the gym had purchased to try to convince her granddaughter to come back. The granddaughter had tossed it into the elemental plane of Earth. #Base Raiders. And so Tom brought the lady in the unmanned drone back to the legs because the legs were already sort of like she had already half talked them into a communist uprising.
Well, unionizing, actually.
Unionizing. Yes, I'm sorry.
A little different, but yeah.
Yeah. So he brought her back because obviously the rest of the body had shooed the drone away somewhat
collective bargaining
destructively.
rights. Yeah.
When that was happening, so he brought her back, and thusly we talked the, probably hundreds of feet tall elemental lord into destroying himself by fomenting economic rebellion amongst his many parts.
Yeah, that's a way of doing it. So.
Can I say #Base Raiders? Well, because you insinuated that, fight me IRL, bro, would be a bad choice.
Yeah, I didn't want to do a giant fight against a giant. Yeah, at that point. So yeah, I thought a way of you could have fought parts of the body while doing the same thing. If you could have just blown up the head while distracting the other body parts, or turning them to fight each other, which would have been hard.
We did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like fight. Well, yeah, the arms did, but like getting the legs to fight against that, they just unionized. So, that was easier. But yeah, it was fun. I wanted to do something.
It was great.
Yeah.
It was a very Base Raiders moment.
It was very Base Raiders. So yeah, this has been RPPR episode 140, Games in Your Game. I'm Ross Payton.
Bill Slimore.
Take it easy, next time.
Next time.